Everyone, welcome to another episode of Gossip Without Prejudice. My name is John. Lindsay's name is Lindsay.
Hello.
We have our very first guest episode today. Joining us is Tyler O'Brien, also known as the Longhair Lawyer. Tyler is a business contracts and estate attorney, if I got that correct.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
And Wills.
Raised in rural community Ritzville, Washington, and a cum laude alumnus of Gonzaga University School of Law.
Go Zags.
He is a triple admittee of Washington, California, and the Texas Bar, and he certainly currently serves as the Young Lawyer Liaison to the Washington State Bar Association Solo and Small Practice Section. Tyler, welcome on the show. Introduce yourself to the audience. We'd love to hear more.
Thank you. Well, you introduced me pretty well, so I'm not sure what more there is to add. But yeah, I guess I'm the long hair lawyer, so to speak. The biggest change in my life recently is that I've been in California for the last 3 years, which is not my home state. I'm from Washington, but I'm back here physically present in Washington, and it's nice to kind of kick that off with, I guess, a trip onto a podcast here in Seattle.
Well,
Nice and local.
This is for those of you watching at home. This is our very first guest episode. So we couldn't have picked a better first time attendee.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you
Tyler,
so much.
you've been on my feed for a really long time.
Mhm.
You post on Instagram. You're very outdoorsy. If I recall, one a while ago, you were getting a tattoo and you were talking to your communities about it.
Oh, fun.
Among many other hobbies. Tell us a little bit about your ethos, because that's just so different and fresh from a practitioner. I mean,
Yeah.
the long hair lawyer itself is fantastic branding. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I guess the origin of the long hair lawyer is actually kind of silly, basically. When I went out on my own and decided I wanted to do a solo law practice, it was really important to me that I would not be affiliated with the negative image that's associated with other attorneys. Just kind of this image of greed and being nasty, an image which, some of our colleagues over the years have kind of earned for our group, right? There's some truth to it. But basically, as I was going about trying to decide what my practice would be called, I was like, how can I separate myself from that image in a way that potential clients, anyone I'm interacting with, is immediately going to realize that I am basically just not that way, that's not me.
Yeah.
And I was growing my hair out a little bit during law school, and I just kept running into people who were saying, oh, when are you going to cut your hair? You're not going to be able to get a job. Can you go to court? Are you even allowed to go to court like that with long hair?
How dare they?
Yeah, basically. And so I was like, well, obviously, when people see this, they're not associating that with the image of an attorney at all. So I get a bypass, the greed and all those negative things. So that's kind of how the long hair lawyer, the image of it came to be.
It's beautiful.
If that's makes sense. I'm not sure if that answers your question about ethos exactly, but
That totally does.
Definitely.
Tell us some more about how you help your clients, because we see from your website. We'll be putting Tyler's socials and website in the show notes, by the way. We see so much about your focus on your mission and not so much on your business.
Yeah.
I would argue business and mission are the same thing, but most lawyers don't.
yeah.
How did you get such clarity on that, right out the gate, when it takes most people decades, if ever?
That's a
Yeah.
great question.
I was
And-
surprised by the amount of really the vibe that you have pinned down. It's really specific and it's
Thank
really
you.
approachable.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that the answer to that question is I made a business plan, right?
There you go,
Most
folks.
people don't make business plans. And, for anyone, whether they're attorneys or my clients or not, anyone that wants to have especially a service-based business, but any business, if you take time at the outset to create your mission and vision and values and delineate what those three things are, it'll really help drive the direction you want to take your business and inform the services that you want to provide in general and how you're going to go about that. For me, it was more important, and it still is more important, to be going about things for kind of the right reason and interacting with the types of clients and people and other attorneys that I want to interact with. That's more important to me than making money. So in a way, making money is really important. Don't get me wrong, but
We all like groceries.
being able to,
That's
basically in the beginning and for the last couple of years, I've been really focusing on developing this brand that attracts a particular type of person. And as I progress through my career or just life, and as this kind of brand sits around for a while,
Mhm.
people start to remember it to a point where it kind of builds and builds, and then you kind of start to see more, basically more clients, more people showing up through
Mm.
kind of the intake process. But
Yeah, you've got that name recognition.
Yeah.
we're getting there, yeah.
Getting there. Nice.
What I always ask, like, when there's such a fresh take,
Mm.
Hmm.
a lot of what I say is that, like, the risk you take of doing something different is you have to be willing to be misunderstood.
Mm.
Yeah.
What unexpected challenges have you faced, maybe from a business perspective or from fellow practitioners in the field, if any?
So what's funny is I actually expected a lot of challenges, and there really haven't been any, quite frankly.
Good. We love
I
to hear
I really felt like I was going against the grain, and I am with my brand image and the way I do things, so on and so forth. And I was actually expecting a lot of pushback from other licensed attorneys
Mm.
who would say, "Oh, well, he's not a real attorney. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. Like, you can't be this nice and friendly and be a successful attorney." I even suspected, because I do mostly transactional stuff, but I do some pre-litigation work, I'd call it too. And honestly, under the right circumstances, I would do litigation as well. But I've yet to encounter like an opposing attorney who says like, "Oh, you're an idiot. I don't respect you."
Mhm.
And that's just something I thought would happen, and it hasn't. On the flip side, what I've actually gotten is just a ton of appreciation and understanding from all manner of colleagues who basically like the brand, and they like what it stands for, and they like the way I go about things. I have encountered a couple of, I would say, predominantly, well, demographically, it's a bunch of older people and older
Mhm.
men in particular,
Mm.
who are not attorneys but are uh, either, well, actually, they haven't been clients. They've been like advisors in other industries,
Mhm.
like financial planners or things like that, who are maybe kind of in my clients' ears, like, is this guy really legitimate? It doesn't seem like it. Like, he must, long hair lawyer, he must just be a cannabis lawyer. Like, should he really be advising you about real estate? That type of thing.
Do you
So
do cannabis work?
no, I don't.
Okay. Well, there you go, folks.
I don't. It's too bad. I have a brand that's just purely set up for it, but no, I haven't done any cannabis work. That's pretty niche area. And I think it would have been really cool to get into about like 10 or 12 years ago and to help people get all these initial licenses and help with all the zoning issues and the issues with the
Yeah.
banks. But I think it's to the point now where there's a lot of people that have it pretty locked down. And so, at least in Washington,
The market has
it's
matured.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really has, and there are some people who really know what they're doing and have some solid experience. So,
What's
Very
the
cool.
work you've been most proud of?
Ooh, I love that one.
oh man, you know, it's kind of funny. The ones I'm the most proud of are some of the least complicated things, the things I don't enjoy as much. Like, honestly, one of the more recent ones is I had some tenants last fall who basically just had a really bad situation with their landlord. There were kind of numerous issues with the way they had presented the place. It was an apartment complex. They had neighbors who were basically affecting their right to quiet enjoyment for the attorneys who are out there. And basically, I told them, I basically, on three different bases, you have every right to just terminate this tenancy and walk away. And there's always a but there. But your landlord might come and they might sue you, and they might claim that you owe rent for the next 10 months or whatever.
Yeah.
Basically that almost happened. The landlord came back and, was threatening them, but basically through the exchange of a couple of back and forth letters with an attorney explaining that they had no case. And granted, the statute of limitations isn't up. They could sue them at some point. But basically it just disappeared and the problem went away. And seeing those people who went from having just a really distraught, unfortunate situation where they felt super trapped
Mhm.
to going from that to them feeling kind of free and being in a new living situation, not really being concerned about this landlord suing them because the landlord really has no basis to. And even if they did, they've got a lawyer that's on their side, right?
Totally.
That's a really good feeling. And some other ones that come to mind is there have been a couple of estate plans I've done that have been really simple, not complicated at all, but the people are just so appreciative because they have a plan. They're like, oh
Mm.
my gosh, just seeing my kids' names on this will or this revocable living trust makes me feel so good. I feel so much better. I'm relieved. And then I have to remind them, like, you still have to fund that trust.
Oh.
Like, there are steps to be made, right? But yeah, those are the types of things that are the most rewarding anyway. The things I enjoy the most though are like really absurdly complicated, just stupid real estate deals that really shouldn't even exist that I'm
Mm.
trying to like piece together and get to close over the course of months or maybe even years. Like that's the fun stuff, but usually it's a little the bigger clients like that are a little less appreciative. It's not quite so personal to them.
And do you think those moments, because I hear this throughput of personability and client
Yes.
service,
Mhm.
do those moments come often enough? Because you value them so highly. I'd love to hear like, is there more good you feel you could be doing, and if so, what's your plan to get there? Because I know this is a new developing practice and it's just getting off the
Yeah.
ground relatively.
That's a really interesting question. I guess so the theme or the values of
Mhm.
my law practice are empathy and ethics. That's the two focus. I think I have a tagline that's a little better than that. It's like empathy and ethics in everything, always innovative, never outdated. That's what's on
Nice.
the website, which I really like. I think to answer your question though, yeah, they do come often enough. I could certainly, I'm still at a point as a growing practice where I can take on more clients and more work. But I feel fulfilled, I guess, is what I'm saying. I feel fulfilled enough. It's not that I'm like from day to day thinking like, gosh, I wish I could have helped someone more today. Am I doing enough as a person? Like, I'm not having that exact existential crisis on a day to day basis. So.
And if that is so rare, I really want to emphasize to the audience that
Mm. Yes.
one of the
Yeah.
reasons why we brought this podcast Tyler in specifically today is because he has this fulfillment and this vision that so few other practitioners have. And so I wanted to ask you, Tyler, if we have a fair number of attorneys in our audience, what would you tell them if they were, they're at a mid law firm or a small firm that isn't theirs, or they're just starting in their career? If there's a piece of advice or a couple pieces of advice you could give them to stand out, stand apart, or find their purpose, what would it be?
Man, that's pretty tough because I know in reality I'm speaking to a lot of people who have much more legal experience and life experience than I do. So it's kind of a tough position to be in to try and advise them on, what they should do with their lives. I will say to start with, if you've ever thought about having a solo practice, you should look into that a little bit. Because part of the reason that seem so happy and carefree and, I'm so happy with helping my clients is I have a great deal of autonomy over how I do that and when I do that and how much time and work I need to dedicate to it. And
Mm.
that's a pretty big piece. But at the same time, I think part of it is like I talked about having a business plan earlier,
Mhm.
but even if you don't have your own business, something you could think about is kind of developing your own personal brand. That doesn't literally mean you have to like come up with a gimmick like I have or, be Better Call Saul or whatever and market yourself that way.
Mhm.
But if you think about it, even if you're an attorney, if you're an attorney at any firm and you're kind of like hitting that mid level, you're expected to build a book of business for yourself, whatever that means, because nobody knows
Yeah,
exactly.
no one knows what that means.
But you really are marketing yourself and you are developing a reputation. And if you took the time to sit down and treat yourself as if you were a business or as if your own last name was a brand you wanted to develop, and sit down and think, what is my career mission? What is my vision for my career, how I want to change my profession? What are my personal values that I want to make clear clients know I have? If you sat down and took those kind of steps to figure out what you wanted, that would probably be a good baseline. And then you can hopefully integrate that into your little piece of the firm that you're a part of.
Hmm.
Because that's kind of the weird thing about law firms is this generic partnership model that we have makes it less like you're actually one business and more like there are several small sole proprietorship,
Wearing
solo
trench coat.
ventures, all within one
Yeah.
that kind of just share, it's a pretty weird system.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of other industries have it too, like accounting, engineering, consulting in some instances, things like that. But it's a peculiar model.
I-
So
I-
this is like, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to point out McKinley Irvin, for those of you outside the Seattle metropolitan
Ah.
area, is one of the largest family law firms, one of our competitors. They are also, I think, 11 former solo and small offices that have come together under one brand. If you go to their website, their footer is like 5 feet thick of just different addresses and phone numbers because they've
Wow.
retained all their old real estate. It's just such a perfect encapsulation. So that's a very cogent observation. Sorry, go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah.
I didn't want to
Well,
interrupt you.
what I'm seeing here with that as well is individualism.
Mhm.
Something about having your own practice and choosing to do what you do. Is that something that you believe is encouraged in the legal industry?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
No is
No.
the short answer. Well, if you think about it, one of the issues with the kind of the partnership model and the way a lot of people do it is it really disincentivizes um, people who are lower on the totem pole, so to speak, from exercising that individualism or having that autonomy. Because as soon as you step into it, not all law firms are this way. So let's just be clear. But from personal experience interacting with a fair amount of law firms and talking to a lot of my peers and watching a lot of people complain on LinkedIn, most of them are this way. So basically, like, you kind of step in, I feel like, and immediately you're expected to kind of find your own clients because the more experienced folks, the partners in the firm, are afraid that if they share theirs with you, and you do a bunch of work for them, at some point you'll wake up and realize you could just abscond with those people, you know? And so it's like, the best, the most like financially productive like law firm associate is actually going to be a person who does not have a lot of individualism, who is not really outgoing, just in the sense that they wouldn't be willing to go out on their own, and maybe kind of just lacks a little bit of the social wherewithal to run away with those clients. From a business perspective, I think that's, if your goal is to make money, that's the type of person that you want underneath of you. And, it kind of disincentivizes developing people's social skills as well. So it's a tough system.
If you had a magic wand and you could change either anything about the legal profession or anything about the way we structure our law firms, what would it be and why?
I'm not sure. I've dedicated a great deal of time to thinking about this, and I'm really not sure, particularly on the business structure side, because I don't think the answer is that we should only have solo practices. There's representation of clients in certain matters that really require like a larger team of people. I don't know that the answer is to make everything like a strict PLLC or professional corporation and do, profit sharing. I have no idea what the answer is, as far as the business structure side. On the just how could the legal industry change side, I just think we need a little bit more of a focus on just cooperation and collaboration. The practice of law is really about collaborating with other people, not competing against them. And we just have so many pretty bad, just unfortunately designed systems in place that it just really sets people up for failure, starting in law school.
Oh,
too.
yeah.
So
Well, actually, it's interesting that you touch on law school because I was
Yeah.
going to ask, what was your law school journey like at Gonzaga?
Hmm.
What did they get right? Because I'd love to hear about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I enjoyed Gonzaga for the most part. Like, I thought it was a good institution, generally speaking.
Sure.
For me, I went to law school during COVID. So my first semester was in person. I got the regular law school experience, which was great for me. And on the off chance there are any potential future lawyers listening right now, it was very manageable for about the first like 4 to 6 weeks, I felt like my mind was breaking because I couldn't process the amount of information, and the amount of reading was crazy. But then after a while, it just kind of clicked, and then it got a little easier from there. And I think that's what most people's experience is like. Although for some people, it might take a whole semester or a whole year or whole 2 years before it finally like clicks.
Mhm.
But that's kind of what it's like for me. Sorry. So moving on. Then after that first semester, everything was online for a semester. They changed the test format to 24-hour open book exams, which
Oh.
is,
Far harder, in my opinion.
well, so the thing is, and I expressed this to every single professor I had, I'm like, this is just patently unfair to some people.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, well, I guess I wasn't single. I had a girlfriend, but I'm like, I am at that time like 23 or something. I have no kids. I have no dog. My girlfriend lives an hour and a half away. I am going to spend like 20 working hours on making sure that the essay answers to this test are perfect.
Mhm.
And it is not fair that I'm going to be able to do that. And someone who has a job or 2 kids to look after, they're just not going to be able to do that. So if you want to have these tests, like you need to shrink the time frame down. Otherwise, people like me are just going to have an advantage. We're going to get better grades. Lo and behold, none of them listened to me, but that's what happened. So they switched to this format, and I bet I benefited from it personally, like greatly. So not the right decision, but it was okay.
Just a reminder to the top of the episode, Tyler graduated cum laude. So
Yeah, which I think is just I think that just means like in the top third or something.
Yeah,
It's not
something
like
like
it's
that.
not they add more words when you're more special.
Yeah, summa cum laude.
summa cum laude.
Magna or something.
Yeah. I mean, which is so interesting because I had a similar experience. I participated in this last law school admissions cycle, and I was struck by how much of an advantage already, how much the system advantaged people with time. Because I'm working a full-time job. I'm working on starting a family right now, and I was competing against undergraduates who had maybe 10 if they had to work at all, which for the top of competition they don't. They study
Yeah.
for a full year.
Mhm.
If someone was considering jumping into such a system, what would you say to them, specifically to the potential students, the 0Ls, who don't know whether or not a career in law is right for them?
Oh, well, okay, so 2 things. The first, now I'll just say the one thing, never mind. Oh, actually, no, there is 2 things. So first, for the let's say basically, I don't think Gonzaga or law schools really operate on these 24-hour exams anymore. So I think that was more of like a temporary COVID issue. And
COVID
they
measure.
Felt it back, so I wouldn't worry about it. But in a system like that, for the most part, I would say, unless your plan is to go work for, big law firm, and that's your goal, your grades don't matter that much anyway. So, they do matter. They're gonna help you get that first job at whatever local firm you want to work at or whatever you want to do. It's important to try and get good grades, so on and so forth. But they don't matter that much. So if your concern is, man, I'm not going to be able to compete with these people, I'm going to end up being like a middle of the road student. That's not going to tank your career. It's not going to matter. And quite frankly, you probably, particularly if you're like coming in as an older student, you probably have life experience that is going to make you kind of desirable and comparable to these students that have top scores anyway. So that's one piece. Second piece is, though, for anyone going into law school, I would really encourage them to think very hard about the environment they're going into. The type of people that have kind of been pre-selected and preordained to be in there are very proud, competitive, and intelligent people. And at the same time, the system, especially with all the forced curve grading, really people react to that very poorly. So, and I know hopefully this will all change, and there's a lot of law schools that are kind of stepping away, or the US News ranking isn't basing things so much on what their curves are, this and that. But basically, when you are in a forced curve system, it doesn't matter how well you do in a class. It matters how well you do compared to other people. I really specifically remember, some teachers don't seem to understand that either. Some professors. Like, the 2 things that drove me crazy were, one, when they'd make a class too easy. Like our civil procedure class, most of the testing was all multiple choice. And granted, I mean, multiple choice doesn't mean that it's easy. I mean, the bar exam's multiple choice, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is like it was to a point where, the class average on like the final exam, I bet it was like over 80%. Well, they can't give everyone 80% in the class because that's not how the curve works. Some people need to get D's. 2 people can get A's. Everybody else is in the middle. But what that means is that your grade is lower than your raw score in the class, So it's not your performance that matters, it's your performance compared to everybody else. And basically what happens is students who are really socially aware, this is all my perspective. I've written about it a fair bit, but students who are super like empathetic, socially aware, recognize the system, basically get the choice to either withdraw from everyone else and study alone and not help other people because they're concerned if I help other people, they might do better than me. Or if they kind of have a little mean streak, they can go and sabotage other people. And they're the people who tear the pages out of the book in the library, which that never happened at Gonzaga, at least while I was there. We actually had someone, I don't know who it was, I suspect who it may have been, actually went in the library during this 1L legal research and writing project, and they actually put a little sticky note sticking out of the exact page we needed in this one book that we had to have. It's like, wonderful person, whoever that was.
A hero.
They understood. Well, maybe they didn't understand the system at all, or they were just like, screw it. But
Yeah.
but that's the thing, you basically, I would like everyone to recognize the system they're in so that they can choose whether and how they want it to affect them. Whether they're going to withdraw to kind of protect themselves a little bit, whether they're just going to say screw it and go help other people anyway. That's what I'd like them to think about, because I think that forced curve system, more than any other particular thing in law school, really drives people to not cooperate or collaborate, not collaborate with each other. And then we've basically spent 3 years in most cases socially conditioning people to not work with each other. And then you throw them into this law firm environment that has its own strange hierarchical issues and its own things. And you've basically taken these people, conditioned them to not be able to handle something like that. And then it just makes the practice of law even worse,
Yikes.
What when you talk about getting thrown into real practice, the hierarchy of law firms and the adversarial system more generally, I want to ask, what do you actually like about the foundations of the adversarial system in the U.S. legal landscape?
Oh, like just well, generically speaking, I think that it's pretty great. I mean, I do not consider myself a constitutional law scholar of any kind. It's kind of funny, when I was an undergrad and like taking political science classes, I would have considered myself like, some sort of constitutional law expert then. But now that I've actually taken constitutional law and been a lawyer for a few years, I'm like, yeah, I know absolutely nothing.
I look at it.
But yeah, I think generally speaking, the right to representation, the right to face your accuser, it all makes sense. What I would say is a lot of lawyers tend to be unnecessarily confrontational with each other. And I don't think that that's beneficial to the client representation. But generally speaking, on a fundamental level, I do like that we have this adversarial system.
And if there was one thing you wish, not practitioners, but if there's one thing you wish the public knew about the legal system that's commonly misunderstood, what would it be?
Honestly, I think, and this gets a little bit political because there are a lot of different views. But I would say that I wish they understood that at the higher court level, most of the judges and most of the justices are actually making most of their decisions based on a judicial philosophy rather than a conservative or liberal, like bifurcation type of thing. I've been really astounded over the past several years just watching a lot of Supreme Court decisions occur and then people expressing like a great deal of confusion over them. Like when Well, I can't think of a good example of it, but when all of the conservative justices right now, and I say conservative because that's what everybody
Yeah,
says, right?
yeah.
But when they all vote together in lockstep, there's a group of people who are like, wow, they're voting for this obviously because of their affiliations with conservatives, right? But then every once in a while, you have something like when the court extended protections under Title VII to folks who, based on sexual orientation and gender identity as well.
Mhm.
Neil Gorsuch wrote that opinion.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, "Oh, that's super weird that he did this." But he's like a textualist, and he read it that way that basically don't need to get too far off in the weeds there.
Yeah.
But then the next decision comes by, and it's Roe versus Wade getting overturned, or it's something else, and people are immediately like, "Oh my gosh, these people are back to voting based on XYZ." And I mean, there's a couple of justices like Thomas, I think, seems to me pretty blatantly like he's making decisions
Yeah.
based on what based on his political beliefs rather than interpretation. But on the flip side, the ironic thing is that to an extent, that is what the progressive interpretation of the Constitution is, kind of. So in some sense, the liberal ideology of interpreting the Constitution that the liberal justices do is to interject kind of the modern their own political views in some sense. So it's less forgivable for Thomas because he's pretending he's not doing it at all. But by and large, I don't think that our like Supreme Court system and that our federal, that these higher up courts are broken, at least not to the extent that a lot of the public seems to. And so I still have a fair amount of faith in our judiciary that a lot of people don't. So that's what I would like. And they don't necessarily need to share my faith, but I would really love it if people understood, if your average citizen understood the differences between textualism and originalism and progressivism and these different kind of means of interpretation, so they could kind of decide for themselves whether judges and justices are making decisions that are very politically influenced, or whether they're not, rather than just hearing from either Fox News or CNN or whatever they're watching and just deciding that must be true. Yeah.
As someone with no legal background, that's definitely something that I have personally run into.
Mhm.
And as we've been working on this podcast and I've been learning more and more and more about the industry and how the Supreme Court operates, it's news to me, but it's absolutely the case. And I agree. I wish that was more widely understood. I
Yeah.
guess talking about it is the only,
Totally.
course that
Yeah.
we have.
Yeah, and it's really tough too because so many things that happen at the Supreme Court level are actually very procedural. People will perceive some case as being like, "Oh man, they just struck down this. The court is saying that this state is not allowed to do this thing ever." And it's like, well, actually, no. All they said is that the taxpayer that sued doesn't actually have any standing. They have no right to bring the case.
Or something similar.
And so
Yeah.
there's just so many. So it's just so tough because on one hand, I don't think people need a specific legal background or legal education to understand most of this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's just so easy to look at a headline and just get completely confused and overwhelmed and get this perception that things are happening a certain way when it's actually probably a lot more nuanced than that.
Fully agree.
I think, and we've been covering the Supreme Court more and
Yeah.
more just because it's been in the news, and in our opinion, law and politics are ultimately intertwined, at least, when they get high enough at the federal level.
In your opinion, I've never heard. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I think they're pretty fundamentally,
Yes. They're
intertwined.
fundamentally linked, and I've always been wondering, I find myself wondering more and more. I also have a lot of faith in the judiciary to ultimately, get it right in the long run, and maybe there'll be hiccups and stumbling blocks because justices and judges are ultimately human. But I similarly am seeing the public turn against the judiciary or just systems in general more and more often, the
Yeah.
judiciary among them. And I honestly am sometimes at a loss in how to like get the messaging out that some parts of the system are really fundamentally trying, if not
Yeah.
succeeding.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. The tough part is like I try to emphasize for me, I try to emphasize those instances where it's actually really clear that like the Supreme Court, for example, has made decisions that are like, that the conservatively appointed justices have made decisions that are directly contradictory to what, the Trump administration wants in a particular instance or, things like that. I try to remind people of those instances because I'm right there with you. The thing is it's just an unfortunate situation because people really want to blame the judiciary.
Yeah.
And we've seen it's really been really unfortunate in the past couple of weeks even to see the Trump administration or you speak about the administration very broadly, but
Mhm.
a couple people of within it saying things like, "Oh well, we should ban federal judges from instituting nationwide injunctions."
Injunctions,
It's
yeah.
like, no, that's how an injunction works. Like
Yeah.
that's the whole point,
Yeah.
So it's just like little things like that. But honestly, things like that reflect that some people that end up in positions of power don't exactly have the background to understand how some of those things work.
Mhm.
At least that's my perception. Maybe they do have a very sophisticated understanding and have just arrived at a very different conclusion than me.
It's
But
possible.
I kind of doubt it in
Yeah.
those instances where they're like, "Oh, they shouldn't be able to issue these injunctions." No, because a year ago or next year there will be something where you want them to issue an injunction because it's really important to your values. So,
In the context of the judiciary and the current state of discourse,
mhm.
what gives you hope for the future,
Ooh.
whatever future that may be?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I think just I've been watching and again, I don't consider myself some sort of constitutional law scholar or anything, but I've been paying attention to this stuff for close to 8 or 9 years now, fairly closely. And basically, just the pattern I've seen over that period of time, for the most part, is that the judiciary does operate pretty independently.
Mm.
So it kind of just takes constantly them going back again and again and proving that they do. But my perception is that things are going to be okay. So I'm not willing to like promise anyone that, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who can provide a lot of counterexamples or get an argument that's honestly something that's on a scholarly basis I'm really not prepared for. But generally speaking, I feel like it's an okay pattern. Like things are going to be all right. That's how I feel about it. So
Glad to hear it.
Amen for the because like I found that a lot of pieces of media lately are pulling people in and being like, "What do you fear about?" Like
Yeah,
they
it's very doom and
they
gloom.
take the negative inference,
Mhm.
and I think that's low hanging fruit for content. But I've always hoped that this platform would be, like
yeah,
the good direction we're headed in.
What can we learn from this?
Yeah, what can we learn from this? What can we educate people about? It's why our law firm has invested a lot of resources, putting this together,
Mhm.
which is in itself a pretty unique position. And,
Yeah,
and a fortune.
totally is.
Yeah, a
And it's
fortune.
awesome.
Oh, thank you,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah.
We can't stop talking about our new studio. We've talked
Yeah.
about our new studio every single tip
Every
episode.
yeah,
like,
every
the
single
last-
day,
like,
every episode, we're like,
already.
it's so nice.
Yeah.
But I wanted to pivot us and ask, we've talked a lot about your ethos and public discourse and the direction sort of the public perception is heading
Mhm.
in the rule of law. What's just anything you want to talk about that you haven't been able to talk about recently?
Yeah.
Oh man,
Here's your platform.
there's so many things bouncing
To
around in
pick
my
but
head.
one, yeah.
Well, one thing that could be an interesting discussion, which I have a lot of thoughts about, and I have not formulated a specific opinion as to how I feel about it, but it would be probably interesting to your listeners, is that Washington State recently instituted a pilot program, which is something that a couple of other states have done, which will allow how do I put this succinctly? Which will allow law firms to be at least partially owned and operated by individuals or entities which are not licensed to practice law. And so Arizona has done this, did it a while ago. I think maybe even on kind of a fairly permanent basis. Utah did the same thing. They referred to it as a regulatory sandbox, which is like, I guess, a fun way of putting it because you get you're like playing in the sandbox. But now Washington's doing it, and it's kind of It's kind of interesting. A lot of people I know because I interact a lot with the solo and small practice section. There are a lot of folks there who are kind of concerned about how it will affect their clients, certainly, but also how it will affect them, and if bit larger interests come in, how it will affect the kind of their practices and whether they'll still have clients. I think they will. To be quite frank, I think the people who are the entities which are going to immediately take advantage of this are actually things like accounting firms who
KPMG.
actually
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
those top 4, top 8 accounting firms are basically going to want to just get their own in-house lawyers so that they don't have to refer people out for estate planning and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
and lose that money.
exactly. So
Yep.
I think it's actually maybe boutique law firms that have very wealthy clients. Maybe it's a concern for them, or frankly, large law firms that are getting all these referrals right now from the KPMGs of the world or whoever it is. Maybe they have some cause for concern. But yeah, I don't have a really strong opinion about it at this point in time, but I think it's pretty fascinating. I think there's a lot of opportunities for kind of increasing some access to justice for people too. Particularly just honestly letting some venture capitalists go and just like dump some money into some of these startups that think that they can provide estate planning services and these different things. It could come out with something that is advantageous to people. But obviously the main concern I've heard expressed is really, and this goes right back to like unauthorized practice of law and like legal ethics classes,
Yes.
like you take in law school and the MPRE and all that stuff. The primary concern is obviously just who's providing the legal services. Are they licensed?
Uncle Jim down
Do
by
they
the
know what they're
river.
doing?
Yeah, yeah.
And from my understanding, the end, at least in services where a real human is involved, the end service provider is a licensed attorney. So it's really just a kind of allowing outside investors to buy their way into law firms, which could be good because something I've figured out from LinkedIn, from the solo and small practice section, from watching other attorneys, a variety of different things, is most lawyers are pretty bad at running businesses. And that's not to say that they couldn't learn and be good at it. And also, I don't mean to make that sound like I'm really good at running a business or something. I'm not going to pretend to be some sort of guru, but letting some outside people come in could be helpful. And I feel like I've been talking too long, so someone else should give their thoughts.
I'm so glad you talked about this because the pilot program has been on my radar for quite
Yeah.
some time. This podcast is produced by a sister company, and that sister company has a document drafting engine that we built from scratch that right now just services protection order clients,
Yeah.
protection order petitions. But we had to walk a very fine line because we can't help these clients too much, despite the fact that all of our shareholders are in leadership of that sister company, non-law firm company. We're either all attorneys or have worked in this industry for 6+ years. We had to walk a very fine line because the ownership structure wouldn't allow us to actively assist the people we're trying to help affordably.
Yeah.
Where I come down on this is that I share a lot of the trepidation because we watched like weird to bring in healthcare, but like dental practices, hospitals, dentists in particular, orthodontists, they permitted outside investment like 20 or 30 years ago. And since then, VCs have just been going around buying up these massive networks of former solo practices. And it's been commercializing and quote unquote professionalizing the industry, which has mostly just been squeezing all the profit out of these technician practitioners, which is a sort of a parallel with attorneys.
Yeah.
And so I've watched other industries try this make this leap, and I think it has problems, but where I ultimately landed and where others might reasonably disagree is that I think the benefits outweigh the potential risks because we right now are in an affordability crisis, an access crisis, a mental health care crisis for the practitioners.
Yeah.
And basically every type of crisis there could be in an industry is right now.
I would also say with that, and I've heard the word cartel thrown a lot lately, and I hadn't before in this context, but I really like it. The legal industry does operate within a cartel, basically meaning we have, by virtue of unauthorized practice of law statutes, not our ethics handbooks, but statutes. We are the only people that are allowed to do a great deal of many things. And part of that creates a basically like resource scarcity. And that's part of the reason why we get to charge exorbitant hourly
Yeah.
rates.
All of our associates here charge like 500 and up
Yeah.
and up,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is
And
crazy.
and quite frankly, well, within like our capitalistic society and everything, that's totally reasonable. And I'm all for that price competition. It's basically because of scarcity. I don't keep saying that funny. Maybe it's just the lack of the pop filter. But basically it's kind of artificial.
Yeah.
And I think that if we open this up and allow some other maybe more efficient systems for providing services to come in, the price of the price of legal services could drop. And that does not inherently mean that law firms will make less money, because in a lot of instances, law firms do not operate very efficiently. And maybe bringing in some outside business interests and investors to come in and kind of, more people from legal ops to manage things might make it so that, the change might drive us to be more efficient in order to compete with the lower prices. And then the lawyers will be making about the same amount of money, but maybe there will be more services, more capacity for services available to people.
It's
That's why I'm optimistic about this myself.
Yeah.
it's interesting that you talk about how inefficiently most law firms run.
Yes, this is what I think about.
Yeah, we Hemmat Law, we haven't talked about it yet on the podcast, but we actually we secret shopped 400 family law firms in the state of Washington just
Wow.
earlier this year.
400.
It is the largest secret shop survey of family law firms specifically in U.S. history.
It's a beautiful data set.
We worked with the same analytics team behind the Clio Trends report that Clio puts
Wow.
out every single year. Only about law firms aren't answering their phones.
Yeah, this is crazy,
Our
folks.
data indicates that depending on the category, email, phone, website, whatever, about 75% of firms never even answer emails, and 90% of voicemails are never even responded to. Just to start, there are many data points that are very damning, but it speaks to me that if a client were in need of urgent assistance on a legal matter, which here in family law we do DV and high conflict domestic and sexual abuse cases, you need help immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is just an analysis of family law, and we are supposed to be the crisis responders that people turn to most often. And it's almost impossible to get a hold of us as an entire industry, right? And there's only about 600 family law firms in the state of Washington, so this is such an overwhelming representative sample.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a shame.
It's interesting because I've talked with David Elkinich, our ethics attorney, the office's ethics attorney, who is also a professor of ethics at Lewis and Clark Law School in Oregon.
Yeah.
And he has said that he commented to me that we aren't an industry, we're a bunch of technicians that just work on a task, and that has left a massive vacuum of actual legal operations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that is then suppressed by state power. Because the bar prosecutors will come in if a legal ops representative gets too powerful or is perceived to be, getting too close to the wheels of power, for better or worse. And so I wanted to ask, what would you be like? Are you optimistic about the Washington State Supreme Court to make these inroads, or are you where do you fall on? Because I know you don't quite have an opinion yet, but do you have a general
Yeah. No,
sense of
I'm cautiously optimistic, I would say. I'm really, I guess. So I'm not sure whether it will actually ultimately do any good in the grand scheme of things. But a lot of people are really concerned about the potential for this to cause some sort of irreversible harm to our industry, and I don't think that's going to happen at all. It's also a pilot program. They could just stop at any time they want.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The one thing that
LLTs.
yeah. The one thing, kind of for the sake of fairness, that concerns me a little bit is I suspect, because they haven't come out with what the application process for all of this is even going to be and how you get approved.
Yep.
I kind of suspect that a really large, like an accounting firm, a huge one, is going to have a really easy time getting their thing approved and be able to do whatever they want. And from talking to some friends in that industry, they're already moving on this. They're already creating their separate branches. They're already, putting the pieces in place. But on the other hand, I think that when I go and submit my application and I decide that I want a real estate investor to be a part owner in my firm, these aren't things I want. I'm, solo all the way for life. Nobody's going to control me.
Nice.
But if I, for example, I have a really good friend that's an accountant. If I said, hey, like, I'd like to, I'd like to bring you on and you could do all the estate planning, these complex estate planning pieces, and we can set up all these crazy trusts and stuff. It'd be awesome. You can make more money, whatever.
Cool.
I just have this funny feeling that those applications where it's kind of a couple of local people trying to go in together. It's an insurance person. It's, whatever those other service professionals you think of, or maybe even something like a construction contractor or a law firm that wants to operate as also a construction contractor, vice versa, whatever it is. I have a funny feeling that those people are going to get shafted and not allowed to be part of the program.
Suspicious.
But
blocks.
the
Yeah.
top 25 largest accounting firms and financial planners and all that are going to have no trouble. That's just that's just my suspicion. Obviously, I'm involved with the bar association sections, and I like what the WSBA does in general. I don't really have any like negative thoughts towards the WSBA or anything like that. But there's just this like sneaking thing in the background where I'm like, I just don't know how this is going to help local people in Washington. That's just what concerns me.
That would be a big shame.
Yeah, it's great that you bring up your work with the WSBA.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Tell us about your experiences working with them, or what is something they're working on that most people don't know about that you'd love to talk
Well,
about.
I think the pilot program would be one, but I really haven't been involved for that long. So I applied to be the young lawyer liaison for the WSBA solo and small practice section probably applied like last May or July or something, because they had that opening.
Yep.
I thought, well, it'd be really good to get involved. I'd realized, and at that point, I don't think we hadn't even solidified our plans to move back to Washington. But I really wasn't doing a good job of getting involved down in California because I really wasn't that interested. And so I wanted to get involved somehow in my home state, meet more attorneys, network, and see what I could contribute. So I applied for that. And then I went to a social event they had, a Mariners game. Which would definitely be worth checking out. We'll be doing that again. But yeah, I went to a Mariners game, met some people, got the position, and then I went to their solo and small practice conference, which was in September last year. It'll be in November this year. Just had an absolutely incredible time. Met a lot of solo and small practice attorneys. I actually met several solo attorneys who are kind of in the same age demographic as me, basically new to being attorneys, new to be solo attorneys.
Nice.
So it was just a really good experience. And since then, I'm basically a non-voting executive member of the board. My main project for them is that I set up their LinkedIn page and have a lot of work to do with that. I've kind of neglected my responsibilities a little bit as I've been busy with this move. But yeah, all in all, it's been a really good experience. And then I actually am in the works of becoming the solo and the liaison to the business law section as well, actually. I've just gotten involved with them in the last couple of months, and I'm not sure if that's actually official yet or not, but I'm going to their executive meeting on Monday, so
Nice.
should be good.
Very exciting.
First off, congratulations on your
Yeah.
meteoric ascension to unlimited godlike power.
Yeah, thank you.
Don't forget
I'm
about
working on it. I don't ever want to be on the board of governors. I just want to be the young lawyer liaison to every single section.
Nice.
Well,
Love it.
we're coming up on the end of our segment, Tyler.
Mhm.
We wanted to lead off with breaking the mold and saying, what question would you ask us
Ooh.
before we wrap up for the day? We'd love to.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Put you on the spot here. Not like we haven't been doing that for the past hour.
Well, you seem to like questions where you ask like, what's the one thing what's gonna change it all? So I guess like, what is the one thing that we won't go too far out? 2 years from now, you each would have liked to have accomplished. Could be anything. Could be climbing Mount Everest. It doesn't really matter to me.
Wow.
I think I'll go first, Lindsay.
Please do.
And then I'll let you follow up.
I think yours is a lot more concrete than mine.
I'm lucky that here at Hemmat Law, our leadership believes in social impact. And my pet project has been Songbird, which it's in beta right now, so we're not publicly, you can't find it anywhere, but you will soon. is there's currently no drafting platform on the market that helps people with in family law cases with motions practice. There's like
Mhm.
LegalZoom if you want to just like do your petition, a static petition and response, and that's it. That's pretty much all every single drafting platform will do.
Yeah.
Uh, and there are lots of drafting platforms that can handle motions practice, but they are hidden. They are not allowed to be distributed to the pro se public.
Mhm.
They are only for practitioners. I've actually asked our drafting platform guys, like, "Hey, could we like pay for accounts and then just hand them out?" And they're like, "No." Like it's not even like a price point discussion. They won't even consider a waiver. They won't even want to try. And it's because everyone's too scared to hand, to put it bluntly, a chimp a machine gun is what they're worried
Mhm.
about, for better
Yeah.
or worse. And I want Songbird, we built it to be infinitely flexible and applicable to any Word doc. And Washington State is a notice pleading state, or not notice pleading state, excuse me, mixing up my civil procedure, is a form template state. And I would love to see Songbird be actually accessible to lots and lots of people in family law, because right now 60 to 70% of the calendars every single week on the domestic calendar in King County are pro se unrepresented.
Yeah.
And that has to mean that horrible injustice is happening all the time.
Yeah.
I'd love to develop Songbird into something that could help those people, because if not us, then who? And clearly the tools available to the public are inadequate.
Yeah.
That
Beautiful.
would be my hope in the next 2 years, but it's going to take. I now understand why no one has done it, because it's going to take a ton of fucking work
Mhm.
to like consider to make it idiot proof enough for anyone to use, and responsive enough to be flexible to real motions practice is
Yeah.
a monumental challenge. But we're hoping to tackle it here at Hemmat.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, Lindsay, what's yours?
Well, I suppose I'll start with, over the course of my life, I have had a really hard time keeping up with the news of everything that's going on and the intense change that the world goes through. And I get really disheartened sometimes when I see unfairness and I see people suffering. And in the past, I've been powerless to do anything about it. But now we're developing this incredible platform where we get to focus on truth and justice. And I feel like I finally have a fulfilling way to actually talk about these events now and talk about the unfairness that we see
Yeah.
and approach it from a legal perspective where maybe these things could actually someday change. And so I've got a really fresh optimism
Mhm.
for the society as a whole working in
Good deal.
this podcast. So I guess that's where my goal ties in, is I want to take it as far as we can.
Yeah. That's
Yep.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's
What am I
awesome.
thinking?
Well, Tyler, I really want to thank you for joining us today.
Yes.
Where can people find you? We'll put all your socials in the show notes, but if there's anything to tell the audience, now's the time.
Indeed.
It's kind of funny because I'm actually going under kind of a almost intense rebranding and opening up some weird businesses, and it'd be fun to come on again and talk about it. But right now, you can just Google the Longhair Lawyer, and hopefully with all my 301 redirects and things with my new website, that should still work.
Nice.
Otherwise, www.longhair.lawyer. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and all my socials are at longhair.lawyer. And I'm also publishing a book on May 1st.
Oh,
So-
we've
That's
got
so exciting.
we
More to-
have almost
more to that.
No, but way to bury the lead there.
Yeah,
I gotta-
seriously.
yeah, we've got to bring you back in to talk about that one. Tyler, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, as a reminder, Tyler O'Brien is the Longhair Lawyer. He can be found on Facebook, Instagram. I follow his LinkedIn. He also has a YouTube channel. We will keep you tied in on where people can find you.
Mhm.
Tyler, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you. It was a lot of fun.